Okay, class, now that we're done with your bell ringer, we're going to go through the lecture part of our lesson, and we're going to talk about physical and chemical properties. Now, I know that you were introduced to these concepts just a little bit ago during the bell ringer, but now we're going to talk about them in depth, and we're going to actually dig in and see what we can find out. So the objective for this lesson, like it's written on the board, is that you'll be able to differentiate between chemical and physical properties. So let's get going. A physical property is any observable property measure that can describe or identify a substance without changing the chemical identity. So this sounds really hard to understand, but it really is not that difficult. It's one of the easiest things to figure out about a substance are the physical properties. And here are some examples of physical properties. So if you're holding a stone, you can try to figure out all of these things about it, like the brittleness, like if it falls apart, if it boils at a high temperature or a low temperature, the color of the element, the density, how dense it is, and you can sometimes measure that using water. And elasticity, if it bends, and the hardness, because we know that diamonds have a hardness, like a very, very severe hardness, and luster, and that's more of a shine, if it has a very bright shine like gold, or if it's very, very dull like lead. Malleability is the ability to bend in a way, so if you chew real gold, it's a little more malleable. It can bend a little bit, but fool's gold does not, which is how you know that gold, if that's how you know that some of the gold is a fake. You figure out the mass and the melting point, so boiling point and melting point are up there. So the point where the element starts to melt. The stiffness, that one's variable as well. The texture, so you can feel it and see if it's rough or smooth or flaky, and that one's a really good one, and a lot of people use that one. Viscosity, and that one's a little more difficult to describe, and we're going to look at a video in a little bit that describes viscosity more. It's more like thickness, like corn syrup versus water, just the ability to have that thick, kind of syrupy consistency. And then volume, so volume, mass, and density. We've got those lovely things up there. And now we go to chemical properties, which is basically any property of a material that becomes evident during a chemical reaction that can change the chemical identity of the material. So as you can see up there, setting something on fire is a chemical reaction, and jumping into acid and toxic waste may not necessarily give you superpowers, but it does have a chemical reaction and it is a chemical property. And so there aren't as many describing words for chemical properties as there are for physical properties, but the ones that are up there are a little bit harder to define, which is why it's easier to determine a physical property than a chemical property. So the first one is toxicity, like that picture before where the person is jumping into the toxic waste. The toxicity of that waste is a chemical property. The stability of a substance, where it has the ability to be in a stable environment. Some elements can only exist in really, really cold places. If you look at the periodic table of the elements, then you see that some of the elements are in brackets, and those elements themselves can only exist for a very short amount of time. So they're very unstable. And so we don't really have the ability to use them in all situations. And so there are some other elements that are very unstable in different situations. Flammability, we're all very familiar with this one. Anything that catches on fire or doesn't catch on fire, anything like the ability of something to catch on fire, that is flammability. And then we have the heat of combustion, and this one is a little more difficult to understand, and it's something we're not going to delve into quite a bit, but we're just going to glaze over it right here, and it's the amount of energy released as heat when a substance is burned with oxygen. So now here's a video on a bunch of different properties, and so we're going to watch it and we're going to see if you can identify different physical and chemical properties. And I'll pause and I'll ask you to fill out the answer on your piece of paper to make sure that you know what the property is and what it's doing. So we're not going to use the whole video, but we're just going to talk about bits and pieces of it that I thought were really good examples. Okay, so this person is catching something on fire, basically. So what kind of property is that? Okay, so I want you to talk with your partner just for a little bit about what property you think that is, and then we're going to come back together in a couple of seconds and we're going to talk about what it is. So, 1, 2, 3, ta-da! Okay, did you guys guess a chemical property? Because if you did, you're right. That is a chemical property, flammability and catching on fire. So, you can put that on your notes. Now, what she's doing is what we would call viscosity. So, if you guys could remember which one that falls under, this is a really good example of viscosity. Look how thick and syrupy it is. How some are more liquidy than others, but some are very, very thick. Especially this one. This one's pretty thick. Okay, so do you guys remember that that one is a physical property? It's something we can touch, something we can manipulate, something we can observe happening without changing the chemical substance of the object. You're only moving it around. You're not changing it that much. Don't try this one at home, guys. This one's a little bit dangerous if you do it wrong. Do you see all of the flour catching on fire right about here? What would that be? The catching on fire. It's a chemical property. So make sure you guys are keeping track of these. Okay, I have a question for you guys. They're asking what properties of copper are you observing? Because it doesn't look like the copper has been changed chemically, but only molded and bent into different shapes. So what do you guys think that would be? Think about that one. Okay, class, now I have a few examples, like some demos that you guys can come up and touch for the more kinesthetic learners. So you guys can come and experience things for yourself. So I've got a fork here because it's nice and shiny, and you guys can actually try to bend it. It's not very malleable, it's pretty sturdy, it's pretty hard. So you can look at it for luster, which is the shine on it, and you can try to bend it, and I know some of you will be able to, but it shows you how malleable the metal is. And I've got some glass stones, which are clear, and you can describe the texture to me as well as the color, because they've got some orange on them, if you can even see that. They're pretty bright, but that is also a characteristic. And I know that other stones have different colors. Their gold can come in rose gold or white gold or yellow gold, but color can also be a very defining physical property. So you guys can come up and play with these and you can tell me about some of the physical properties that you see. And for another physical property, I have olive oil, honey, which is stuck to a napkin, honey, and water. And you can come and play with the different viscosities, because olive oil is a bit thicker than water, and honey is way thicker than olive oil, especially this kind, because this is the natural dark honey, so it takes forever to actually move around. So that is also something you can come and manipulate yourself. And to show a chemical property, I do have some lighters. If they'll actually, oh, that one worked. And I would light something on fire, but as of this demonstration of my lesson, it is not appropriate for me to do so because I could burn myself and burn other things. So when you guys are doing tests like this, trying to figure out chemical and physical properties, especially the chemical properties, make sure you do them with your lab clothes on, which we are going to go put on before we start our lab. So you guys can come up and manipulate everything up here. And I've got some other stuff, so you guys can have examples of everything. But then we're going to start our actual lab for you guys. So let's get going.